So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second session of the first ever SATS Practitioners e-conference, Equipping the Church, Bills, Laws and Leadership. I'm Marilyn Schott, the Registrar of SATS, the team leader for the admin team, and I'm responsible for the Masters and PhD admin. I'm also a student of SATS, and I'm busy pursuing my master's degree. And it's my privilege to chair this session, entitled The Church and Money. Mrs. Zinzile Mongalo will be sharing with us on potential financial pitfalls that the church needs to be on the lookout for, theological motivation for good stewardship, and practical advice on managing money within the church context. It's now my privilege to welcome Mrs. Zinzile Mongalo to our conference. Zinzile is a qualified chartered accountant with vast experience in accounting and compliance across multiple sectors, including JSE-listed companies, government organizations, non-profit organizations, and sole proprietorships. She is a believer and passionate about assisting churches and Christian organizations in this regard. Zinzile is married to Joey Mongalo and is the mother of 1.5 children, as her second baby is on the way. Congratulations, Zinzile, on your pregnancy, and we pray with you as you go through this pregnancy that it will be a good and easy one, and that the birth of your child will go well and smoothly. Zinzile, welcome, and we're excited to hand over to you and hear what you have to share with us. Over to you.
Thank you very much for that welcome, Marilyn. Good afternoon, everyone. I am so excited to be able to speak to you this afternoon about the church and money. Every time money is discussed, it's always such a contentious subject, but I do hope that this presentation will provide some clarity with regards to church and money, particularly the management of money. So I think without further ado, if we can please go to the next slide. I think what we're going to cover in this presentation, we will start off with just discussing stewardship from both a secular and a biblical perspective. We will move on to discuss financial pitfalls of financial management and financial stewardship within the church, and then we will close off with guidelines that are practical, that can be used by the church and Christian nonprofit organizations. Okay. So, stewardship. So we'll start off by discussing stewardship from a secular perspective. And we'll see how, even from a secular perspective, stewardship is seen as something that's very important. And so we need to discuss stewardship purely because when we are discussing the church and money, money has been entrusted usually to the church or to usually any Christian organization. And this money is to be used to fulfill that organization's mandate, their purpose, their mission. And so it is really important to discuss how that money should be stewarded, should be managed, should be taken care of. So this is not something that is unique to Christian organizations. It's not something that is an anomaly. Organizations across the world, secular even, have to deal with the very same issue. And so that's why I decided to also cover it from a secular perspective. Okay, so if we look at the two definitions, Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines stewardship as the careful and responsible management of something entrusted to one's care. Cambridge Dictionary defines it as someone's stewardship of something is the way in which they control or take care of it. Now, I've highlighted specific words that you'll see will form a thread across the whole presentation, and that are critical to the understanding of stewardship. So, my favorite word out of all the definitions is this idea of being entrusted with something. So the Christian organization has been entrusted by its stakeholders to manage something. It is something that they are responsible for. It is something that they need to actively manage. The Cambridge Dictionary says control. So it's not something that's passive. It's not something that you're given the money and the organization just puts it on the side and prays that it's all going to work out. It is a very active thing, and it's a bit of a heavy burden as well. So I think if we can go to the next slide. If we look at the world around us, we can see many examples of poor financial stewardship, because stewardship is not easy. It is not an easy thing. If we look at the financial industry from a secular perspective, it is rife with accounting scandals. And I think the word accounting scandals is really just a corruption, lack of transparency by organization, cover-ups for dodgy dealings, and just very I guess dodgy is the right word, dodgy ways of handling people's money and not reporting about it correctly. In 2008, we experienced the 2008 financial crisis, and that really tore the world to shreds. It was a severe economic crisis across the world. Many economies went into recession. Millions of jobs were lost, if not billions. And why? Why did it happen? It happened because those that were entrusted to manage funds, financial leaders across the globe, made a series of very poor decisions, and a lack of regulation in the financial industry compounded those bad decisions and made it even worse, to the point of a financial collapse in the economic system. So if we look at how has the secular world responded, and I think before we go look at the response, I'm seeing there that I've missed government corruption, but I probably just want to miss government corruption. It is rife. It is happening every day. It is a mismanagement of public funds that we keep seeing. We keep hearing the stories. We keep reading the news, and it is heartbreaking to see the poor financial stewardship of public funds happening. And I won't go into detail there. I try to avoid political discussions, but I think we can all agree that poor stewardship within governments is very evident. We see it all the time, and it affects us as individuals in the country. So going back to how has the secular world then responded to all of this? And their response has honestly to put in more laws, create more stringent reporting requirements, discuss and try put a spotlight on ethics, create ethical guidelines, for financial government. And that's been a way that they've been trying to attack this issue, because it is rife. It is rife in the secular world, and of course it is rife within the church as well. I don't think it's as highlighted within the church, but we know it's there. And so one of the ways that the secular world has responded to this, some of the really great financial minds across the finance community around the world, they came together and they decided to talk about ethics, to talk about financial governance and management, and figure out a way to articulate what good financial stewardship is. What does it look like? And recommend practically ways that companies, corporations can navigate and be able to see how to lead their corporations in a way that encourages good financial management, encourages ethical financial management, good financial stewardship. And so one of these guidelines is called the King Code for Financial Governance. So at this stage, there have been 3 King Codes that have been published, and we're on now the 4th one. And in general, the King Code is highly regarded. This is almost, I would say, the highest level of literature on ethical and effective leadership around the principles of good governance, good financial governance, good stewardship. And like I said, this is the world's way of really just trying to understand this problem that is big, and it's difficult, and it's hard to navigate. And so if I could just give you a taste of what this code comprises of and what it says. So it's made up of various principles around financial governance. I will not go through them all. We do not have all afternoon. It would take forever. But I have highlighted some of the key ones that I think are relevant to the church, that we could benefit from. And let's maybe just take a read through some of them. So I haven't copied and pasted all of them into this slide. I've just put in, if you can go back to the previous slide, please. I haven't put them all in, but I have them here with me, and we'll start off with ethical culture. And so the King Code recommends strongly that an organization needs to have governance that demonstrates integrity, competence, responsibility, accountability, fairness. It places a large responsibility on those that are charged with governance. Those would be the leaders in the organization, those that are responsible for the financial governance, and that's who it places this responsibility on. It encourages organizations to be responsible corporate citizens, which means that while the organization is fulfilling its core objectives, it needs to be aware that it is a citizen in the wider community, and it is responsible for the impact that it has on society, and it is responsible for being a responsible member of society and upholding the law. The third one would be financial viability. It is really essential that the governance operates in such a way that it makes sure that the entity remains financially viable in order to sustainably continue to fulfill its core objectives. Stakeholder reporting. The entity must be transparent with its stakeholders. And issue reports that allow them to make an informed assessment about the performance and future prospects of the organization. And then the last one I've chosen to highlight is the balance of knowledge and skills. So the leaders of the organization, and especially those that are charged with financial governance and financial stewardship, must consist of a body of different types of knowledge, skills, experience, diversity, and independence. And in general, the King Code really does advocate a lot for independence. So not only the people that are within the organization, but having external members that are not actively part of the day-to-day running of the organization, but understand how the organization operates and what the mandate of the organization is, that can keep the organization accountable and can advise the organization in its running. So it really does encourage that, and we usually see that in the form of independent executive board members in companies. Okay, so at the moment, the King Code is a voluntary code. It is an international code. In South Africa specifically, it is not compulsory for companies to apply this unless they are a JSE listed company. All JSE listed companies need to apply the King Code of conduct, and they need to apply the recommendations by the King Code. It usually is an apply or explain approach, in that not every single recommendation will be applicable to that company. But then if it is not applicable to your company, or it is not practical to enforce or implement that particular recommendation, then to explain how your organization is still upholding a particular principle by applying something different, or just achieving that principle that leads to good governance and good stewardship in a different way. And now, recently, in the last version of the King Code, it has now opened itself and tried to just be more simplistic so that it applies to a wider variety of companies. And so one of those is nonprofit organizations. And so there is a section in the King Code that specifically addresses how nonprofit organizations should be run, and how the financial governance should work in there, just as a practical guideline and a practical tool. But obviously, it doesn't have any kind of religious affiliation or anything like that. It just provides just general stewardship principles and recommended practices without really expressing views on a particular religion. I think if we can go to the next slide, we can see what it says is the benefit of applying good stewardship, applying good practices within an organization. So let's see. So I won't read the top bit, but basically what it's saying is these are the benefits. If you apply good governance, good stewardship in your nonprofit organization, in your Christian organization or secular organization, these are the benefits that you will reap. Added credibility and enhanced reputation, an increased impact of activities and advocacy through stronger stakeholder relationships and more effective operational processes, access to funding, grants, and loans on better terms. That's a huge one for nonprofit organizations. The ability to leverage a wider pool of expertise for employment and volunteer work, better fraud prevention due to improved controls, business continuity arrangements that permit the nonprofit organization to operate under conditions of volatility and to withstand and recover from acute shocks. So those would be shocks in the economy and such. And then leadership continuity through succession planning. So I think if we just pause there, we can see how the secular world has identified that stewardship is important. Being entrusted with money and resources is important. It has identified that the world is struggling with this, and it is actively really trying to put energy, literature, minds, resources towards just trying to improve organizations' idea and perspection and implementation of good financial stewardship. So the secular world has gone to great lengths to try and make sure that organizations get this right. Is it working? We would be tempted to look at all the bad media, negative media around all the accounting scandals and corruption and all of that and say that it's not helping. But I think at least what it has done, it is equipped organizations with something. There is a starting point. There is something that they can rely on. It has put the spotlight on the issue. And I do believe that they will continue to strive to just make it even clearer and equip organizations to do better, because we do need to do better when we are entrusted with the finances of others. Okay, so I think let's just pause there. So we've spoken a great deal about stewardship in the secular world and how it's playing out and how they are responding and what they are doing. Let's just pause there for a second and ask a few questions. By asking a few questions, I mean me asking and answering my own questions, not the floor. But these are the questions that I've come up with, and I think to myself, okay, firstly, is stewardship important to the church? I believe that it is. We'll see that in the upcoming slides when we look at it from a biblical perspective. Is the church immune to poor financial stewardship, to corruption, to financial scandal? Don't believe it is at all. I think we mustn't be naive and believe that the church has no sin. The church has all the knowledge and ability and has put enough energy towards this. So it is definitely a topic that is important. It is definitely a topic that has a lot of weight, and it is something that the church should be putting a lot of energy towards in getting it right. And unfortunately, I think in a lot of cases that is missed. I think in general, churches really understand stewardship from a perspective of personal stewardship, from a perspective of stewardship in your own Christian walk, but it gets a bit fuzzy when it gets to organizations and how it plays out there. And there's usually very little that is being done to make it better. Okay, so let's move on to looking at it from a biblical perspective. Okay. So Genesis 2:15 says, "The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it." Some versions say take care of it. I'm reading from the ESV. And so for me, that verse says to me that working and being entrusted with things and taking care of things is something that God designed all people to do, way before the fall. When I am in my lazy state, when I am really being rebellious and sinful, I think to myself, oh, surely God didn't design me to do all this labor, to do all this work. I think I was just designed to just sit in the Garden of Eden, maybe just looking at how beautiful the garden is and just admiring all of creation, not necessarily being entrusted to look after things. And sin must have brought that into the world. That is not the case. Genesis is pretty clear that God's intention was for man to be entrusted with resources, to be entrusted to look after things. And so it is part of our design to look after things. It's not something that is a burden that has just been put upon us by the world or anyone else. So I think that's important as a starting point to just understand biblical stewardship, to say that it is rooted from God's design of people, and that filters through to God's purpose for churches and non-profit Christian organizations, that it is part of the design. So we're not exempt from it. Sorry, it is something that we should take seriously. I do enjoy the parable of talents. Jesus taught on it in Matthew 25. And so if we can just take some time to just read through it, I have highlighted some bits of it. And I think it's a really important parable. And it shows us quite a bit. And I think it shows us just how heavy the stewardship really is and how important it is. And it's not something that should be taken lightly in God's kingdom. So if we just read there. Okay, for it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. There's that word again, entrusted. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. He who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had the 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. Now after a long time the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here, I have made 5 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. Something similar happened with the second servant. He had 2 talents and he made more. And a similar thing was said to him about him being a good and faithful servant. I won't read through it just for the sake of time. Then the last servant who hid his stuff away. So if we track down all the way to verse 24. Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid. I went and I hid your talent in the ground. Here, you have what is yours. But his master answered him, You wicked and slothful servant. You knew that I reap where I've not sown and gather where I scattered no seed. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers. And at my coming, I should have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to him who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness. In that place, there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. How scary is that? So what I like about this parable is it really highlights God's seriousness about stewarding resources that have been entrusted to you. So it is not an excuse to say that we can be exempt from the idea or the principle of stewardship. It is important. It is important to God. In this parable, we see how the master rewards those who have been very active in their stewardship. They've not only protected what was given to them, but they've made it even more. They have invested it or traded in it and just made sure that basically the master gets a good return on investment. They didn't squander or lose the money, or passively just sit on it, and they were rewarded for it. And the one that didn't do that, the one that was passive with it, received the wrath of the master, and the disapproval of the master. And so I think that is really important to highlight in terms of God's perspective of stewardship and the stewardship of finances within the church. Okay, so where are we falling short? You can please go to the next slide. Where are we falling short as the church? In my opinion, I don't believe that churches are putting sufficient energy towards financial stewardship. I think that the heart behind many organizations, Christian organizations, is usually the passion of the mission, which is a beautiful thing. Let's go out and do God's work. Let's go out and make fishers of men. Let's go out and give to the poor and do whatever it is that we can to further God's kingdom or operate our organization in a way that we believe will help God's kingdom and further God's kingdom. But in that mission, finances are usually seen as an administrative task. It is not something that is planned for upfront. It is not something that we particularly know how to deal with. It is not something that we even care to deal with it until it really is, we can't avoid it. So the first pitfall I've put there is financial vision and planning. And I like the word vision because every Christian organization, every church has a vision. They have a mission and a vision of what they want to do. And as when they sit together and they're church planting and they're trying to figure out how will they run the church, how will they run the nonprofit organization, they have a plan and they put that together. And I believe that most churches and organizations are really good at that. But like I said before, they don't allocate sufficient weight to financial planning. It may be at best financial planning in terms of fundraising and getting the money in. But once the money's in, how to manage that money, how to grow that money, how to invest it, how to spend it in such a way that the organization continues for the long term. It's not something that's usually given a lot of space, to be honest. And that's what I've seen in a lot of organizations that have come to me for assistance, and just speaking to people that run some of these organizations. It's usually an oopsie point of, oh dear, we didn't plan enough for this, and this is the situation we now find ourselves in. please help. So if we look at the scriptures, it says, which of you, wishing to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost to see if he has the resources to complete it? Otherwise, he lays the foundation and is unable to finish the work. Everyone who sees it will ridicule him, saying, this man could not finish what he started to build. It's Luke 14:28. So it really is foolish that we would set to go on a mission, to go and do God's work, knowing that we need resources. We will probably fundraise, get those resources, but then we don't plan. We don't stop, pause, sit down, and count the cost. So I think that is very foolish. The Bible is clear that we do need to plan. The second thing is, usually the church, how do I put it? Let's phrase it differently. There are specific gifts. We have different gifts, and financial planning, managing finances, investing finances, stewarding finances is something of a speciality. It's not something that everyone is gifted at. So it is really unfair to expect the leader of a church movement, for example, to be gifted at preaching and having a vision for the church, and also be really gifted at managing and stewarding money. I think that is an unrealistic expectation. Look, there are some that can, and they are great at it. Most aren't. And so it is important that we realize that and we acknowledge that we are gifted differently, and we don't know it all. And I think we don't admit that. And so we start on this journey with people who are very, very passionate, but don't necessarily have all the skills and knowledge required to accomplish the mission and be able to financially steer the organization. So biblically, the verse I found says, for as in one body, we have many members, and the members do not all have the same function. So we, through many, are one body in Christ, and individually members of one another, having gifts that differ according to the grace given to us. Let us use them. And I think we understand this concept very well. If we think of a church setup, we understand that some people are gifted at worship, some people are gifted at praying, some people are gifted at teaching. But for some reason, when it comes to finances, we suddenly all believe that we can all do it and we're all great at it, which is a lie. The same principle applies. Accounting and compliance. This is one that no one enjoys accounting unless you are me. I love accounting, but most people don't enjoy accounting. Most people don't enjoy knowing and what taxes we have to pay. And for some reason, I've come across a lot of Christian organizations who believe that Christians we don't really need to do much accounting. We should be exempt for tax. We don't need to apply to all of that. Yes, there's laws governing it and all of that, but surely we don't need to comply with that. Somehow there's a notion that working for Jesus exempts you from compliance and accounting and taxes. And I'm just looking at the time. I won't read that whole thing, but I'll read that highlighted bit. But basically what this passage says in Romans is that we are all under governing authority. God has placed us under that authority, be it the government, be it SARS, be it the financial regulators. We are under them. And so as Christians, we are charged to obey those authorities. The highlighted section says, pay to all what is owed to them, taxes to whom taxes are owed, revenue to whom revenue is owed, respect to whom respect is owed, honor to whom honor is owed. So that argument flies straight out the window. We are not exempt. Okay. And then monitoring and accountability of those finances is something that we also struggle with. Personal accountability as Christians, we can fully understand. But when it comes to financial governance, accountability is something that we fall short on. And we struggle with. And there's multiple reasons because of that that lead to that. One of the reasons is sometimes we don't think it's necessary. Finances are just an administrative part of things. They're just a byproduct of what we need to do. Sometimes we have the accountability, or we've put people to keep us accountable, but they don't necessarily have the power to do anything, or the knowledge to even spot that something's wrong. So that in itself is a problem. If we look at these verses, iron sharpens iron, and one man sharpens another. Proverbs 27:17. Pay attention to yourselves. If your brother sins, rebuke him, and if he repents, forgive him. Luke 17:3. Without counsel, plans fail, but with many advisors, they succeed. So the word is clearly just rebuking us and encouraging us towards having people around us, having people in our organization, in our churches, that we can rely on to advise, to monitor, to keep us accountable when it comes to the stewardship of finances. Okay. Really chasing the clock here now. So I think let's land this plane. So I've identified all the main financial pitfalls. And let's just spend some time talking about practically, what does this mean? Okay, so the church is not doing well in this area. We can do much better. We realize it's a really important area. God thinks it's important. The world struggles with it, and they're trying to do something about it. What is the church should we be doing? What is the church should we...
Sorry, Zinzile, our time is definitely running out now, and we've only got a few more minutes left. So if we could just wrap this up so we can get to some questions, please.
Perfect. So I'll go through these really quickly. I think the first practical guideline is acknowledging that financial planning is important. We need to acknowledge that financial planning needs to be part of the main vision. It's not a side mission. We need to make a plan of how we're going to manage the church's finances from the get-go, not only when we get in trouble. We need to put the right people in the right places and find ways of involving people that have those talents, that have that education to help us within the church. We can't claim to know everything. And I think then it is important for us as the church to put people in place that can keep us accountable, that can keep our leaders accountable to how they manage their finances, people that can actually make decisions, people that are empowered to make those decisions, and people that have the knowledge of how finances work and should work. And I think that wraps it up. I think we'll cover maybe more of the practicalities of it when we answer some of the questions. All right. Thank you so much for listening to me. Let us open this up to some questions and chat.
Thank you very much, Zinzile, for your very informative presentation. I was very loath to interrupt you there, and we wanted to give you enough time to just wrap it up there. But we're now going to move to the question and answer session. We only have a few minutes for that, unfortunately, so we won't be able to get to everybody's questions, but we'll try to see how many we can answer. Just to remind everyone that a question is a sentence that ends with a question mark. So it must please be a question that you're typing in, and do keep your questions in line with our current topic on the church and money. We do already have a question from Dr. Jessica Primo, and he asks about having money in the church or empowering church members to create wealth is a big challenge in Africa, especially when the majority of the people are living in poverty. What is your response about church and wealth creation?
So I do definitely think that the church does need to participate in wealth creation where we can. It is not always possible. The church has limited resources at times, but I don't think that we are passive onlookers in this situation. I think that Jesus himself, when he was looking at the poor, he said, feed the poor. He didn't say leave it and just continue sharing the gospel. So I think where we can, we should assist. Where we can, we should see how we can manage our resources in order to create more wealth and be able to do that in order to alleviate poverty.
Thank you. Just a question. If some of our pastors and churches would like to know a bit more about this King Code you were talking about, where can they get access to this or find copies of it? It sounds like something quite comprehensive, and I think it would be good for our churches to have that sort of resource.
Yes. So the King Code is, I think if you just Google the King Code 4, you should be able to find it. There are some websites that provide it for free. Unfortunate, so they will allow you to download it, not for distribution, just for downloading. And it's free, but they are also, LexisNexis sells it as well. So you can purchase it if you want a physical copy of it.
Okay, thank you. William Neodus asked the question. He said, often the mission of the church is well funded and running smoothly, but the minister is often neglected. Churches don't look after him. He's left struggling, and then they leave the ministry because of that. And it's a reality in Africa. And how do we avoid this kind of pitfall that pastors are not being looked after sufficiently while the church is looking rich and well provided for? How do we create this balance within our churches?
Yeah, I think that financial planning is important. And Paul in the New Testament goes on about how we shouldn't muzzle an ox and give servants a fair wage. And so I think as part of the church planning and budgeting and all of that, we should be remunerating our pastors fairly. And I think because of all the corruption and bad reputation that churches are getting, where some pastors are mismanaging funds, some pastors are shy to ask about it. They're shy to ask for a fair remuneration. And so that also creates a situation where, because they're so shy about it and they're scared of being called greedy, then they rather leave. And so I think if we create that platform properly in the budgeting process, and all the stakeholders are aware that this is what we are paying the pastor, it is fair based on these reasons, and that is monitored and reported very transparently, I think that will really help.
Thank you. Jessica Pima also asks, where most church leaders are poor and they're always counting the offerings and tithes every Sunday, money will sometimes become a source of conflicts and breakaways. And some pastors are preaching and managing the church's money, pretty much doing everything there. What is your response to that?
I do believe that we need to have a separation of powers within the church. Like I said, different people are gifted differently, but not only that, I think it really creates a conflict of interest if the pastor is actively involved in managing the finances of the church. So I do believe having separate people that are managing the church's finances separate from the people that are teaching And I think it's good for the teachers' hearts as well, so that they preach what the Holy Spirit is saying to them, not being affected by what they're seeing in the numbers. Obviously, at some point, they will have sight of the numbers, but I don't think they should be involved in the active management of those. So I think a separation of powers is the solution, or at least a starting point.
Thank you so much. That basically ends our session. Thank you for your time and for sharing your knowledge with us. It's been a very exciting session, and I'm sure we've learned, well, I certainly have learned quite a bit from you there. So once again, thank you very much, Zinzile, for your time. And let us just close in prayer quickly.